Hi, and welcome to the National Treasure Minute podcast, where we analyze, scrutinize, and celebrate the 2004 film National Treasure, 1 minute at a time. So put on your ocular device and discover a podcast beyond all imagining. As always, I am your co-host Charlie, and I am joined by my co-host Matthew.
Hello.
As we said in the previous two episodes, this podcast is going to be dissecting the movie National Treasure 1 minute at a time in little bite-sized chunks. This particular minute is minute 3. It begins with the story of Charles Caroll being taken to the White House. It begins with a shot of the coachman, Thomas Gates, racing through the rain, essentially. And it ends with Nicolas Cage's grandfather delivering the line, "A treasure beyond all imagining." So setting up the remainder of the legend.
Yeah, what a fantastic line that is. In fact, it's so fantastic it got actually put in the intro.
Only the best lines get put into our National Treasure intro. Only the most iconic lines, which are, of course, beyond all imagining and
the ocular device.
Yeah, so two memorable lines. So this minute, as we said, it really encapsulates the entire first part of the legend, which is Thomas Gates, who is the main character, Benjamin Gates's grandfather's grandfather's grandfather, was the coachman for the last signatory of the Declaration of Independence, Charles Caroll. One night, Charles Caroll decided that he was dying. Not decided, he realized he was dying. He realized he was dying, and he woke up his stable boy, Thomas Gates, and they raced to the White House. Charles Caroll wanted to deliver some news to Andrew Jackson, the president at the time. He wanted to basically reveal the only clue they had to the treasure. But of course, President Jackson was not at the White House that evening, so instead, Charles Caroll delivers the secret, the last clue, basically, to Thomas Gates. So, what are your thoughts, basically, on just this first part of the legend?
Well, I thought, what a fantastic way of setting it up, because as we said in the last episode, it sort of bridges that gap between like something like just like outright like fairy tale and something that is kind of like an actual historical account. Sort of bridges that gap, and I think Charles Caroll was probably one of the best people to pick for this role, because one, even as a historian, as somebody who really likes history and likes American history, I didn't really know too much about him other than the fact that he was the last signer of the Declaration. But what I like about that is because there's just some mystery already in that, because you hear a name like Charles Caroll, and even if you don't know who this guy is, you just get a feeling like, okay, this is like an American founder-like name.
Absolutely.
You know,
yes.
You can tell he's in the same kind of like your Alexander Hamiltons, you know, and your John Jays. This is like a Charles
And nobody's
Caroll.
heard of him, but you know that he's like a founding. You know, if he signed the Declaration of Independence, he's among the greats. He's among the Hall of Fame.
Exactly. So it evokes something without having to say like, oh, and then this is, you know, Thomas Jefferson, and then you start thinking like, well, you know, I know all of the stable boys of Thomas Jefferson because it's recorded in this primary source or whatever. It's like, no, this is Charles Caroll, somebody, you know, your average American doesn't really know too much about. So I thought it was like really interesting that the Gates family is tied not to the biggest name out there, it's not to George Washington. So it's a little bit more plausible that they're tied to somebody that is important, but maybe sort of lower in their ranks.
They picked a founding father of perfect obscurity, you know, that like
perfect obscurity.
So it's kind of like, you know, how in some ancient sources, some ancient writings will basically attribute, you know, it was written by just a random guy or, you know, somebody who remains nameless, but they attribute their work to somebody who was more famous than them. And there's a really famous guy who wrote a lot of Platonic philosophy, and he attributed his whole corpus of work to one figure from the Acts of the Apostles named Dionysius.
Yeah, Pseudo-Dionysius.
Yeah, so he's called Pseudo-Dionysius now because the Dionysius from the Bible didn't actually write it. But you know, he didn't want to say, Jesus wrote this, you know, because it's a little too whatever. So he decided to pick somebody perfectly obscure enough to attribute his work to.
So Carroll is, you know, you get that sort of pseudo-Dionysius role.
Yeah.
Somebody who ties you into the world without having to have all the baggage of, you know, all the history that people know about Jefferson or Washington or something like that. And
right. So a little bit about Charles Caroll. Of course, as we did last time, we went on wikipedia.org/Charles Caroll. And we have discovered quite a bit of information about him. You know, a lot of what they say in this minute is actually accurate. Charles Caroll was actually the last signer of the Declaration of Independence. He was not a Mason, though. So Christopher Plummer says that he's a Mason. He wasn't actually a Freemason. He was the only Catholic signer of the Declaration. And as we all know, the Catholic Church has an ideological objection to Masonry in general. So it's very unlikely that Charles Caroll actually would have been a Mason or even been affiliated with Masons. But
what's interesting about that is actually that his son, also named Charles Caroll, was actually a member. So, you know, they had to have done some sort of research for the film. I mean, it's not like not like Jerry Bruckheimer knows everything about American history. So when they were doing research, perhaps they saw Charles Caroll and they just didn't really scrutinize that enough to say, oh, is it the same Charles Caroll? Or was it actually his father? Or
they just fudged it and were like, you know, we'll make him a
who cares?
Who cares? I mean, we need Paul Revere, George Washington, Ben Franklin. We need, you know, it's probably, this guy probably was a Freemason too, so we'll just, you know, add it in.
Yeah.
Anyway, so one thing I wanted to point out was Christopher Plummer. He plays Nicolas Cage's grandfather. He also played the Duke of Wellington in a movie called Waterloo, and that's of course a movie about the Battle of Waterloo between Napoleon and the Duke of Wellington. And something interesting about Charles Caroll is that he has a connection to both Napoleon and Wellington, both sides. He has two different connections. So Charles Caroll's granddaughter, her name was Mary Ann Caton. She was married twice. The first time she was married, she married a guy named Robert Patterson. And this guy, he's not Robert Pattinson. Robert
Pattinson?
Yeah, Twilight fame. No, Robert Patterson, the brother of the wife of Jerome Bonaparte, who's Napoleon's younger brother. So the first guy that Charles Caroll's granddaughter married was Napoleon's younger brother's wife's brother, okay? So then he died. That guy's name, Robert, he died. She remarried, and she married a guy named Richard Wellesley, who was the brother of Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington. And she's alleged to have had an affair with the Duke of Wellington. Honestly, it's kind of an independently fascinating fact about Charles Caroll that, you know, his granddaughter decided to marry both a Bonaparte and a Wellington, who were arch rivals who met fatally at Waterloo in 1815.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really interesting connection. I never would have known that, but of course, you know, Charlie is sort of avid Napoleon guru fanatic.
Yeah, so that's so we already know I'm a Ben Franklin fan. I also later in life in like middle school, I developed more of a fascination with Napoleon. Ben Franklin kind of fell by the wayside.
I don't want to dunk on Charles Caroll too much. I mean, he signed the Declaration of Independence, but
yes, no, you didn't do that,
and I didn't do that. I haven't declared anything. But one of the things I really liked was as the grandfather, as Christopher Plummer is telling this story, there's a one shot that sort of lingers on Ben Gates as a kid. And you can just tell in his eyes, he's like super, super absorbed with this story. That particular shot stood out to me because that is exactly the feeling a kid would have when their grandfather is telling them about 1832 Charles Caroll. Right. And then like you're related to him. And also, you know, he's going to lean in and say, a treasure.
Yeah.
A treasure beyond all imagining. It's like they capture the exact feeling that I think a child would have. And that's what I really like about cinema is its ability to capture those feelings. And I think
absolutely.
Yeah, I think it happens right here.
And we have an ancestor who fought at the Alamo. So plausibly our grandfather could have leaned in and told us about Mr. John who fought at the Alamo.
Stephen really Austin was going to tell him something important that was buried that Santa Anna took away or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll go treasure hunting one day.
Yeah.
So another thing about this minute that I want to talk about was apparently there was a deleted scene that didn't make it in the movie.
Right.
So, you know, he says that Andrew Jackson wasn't there that night, but the original cut of the movie had Andrew Jackson coming out of the White House and basically discovering Charles Caroll's corpse, you know, because he had died by the time he came out. Basically, Thomas Gates says, oh, this was the final clue, was Charlotte, you know. And Andrew Jackson says, oh, Charles Caroll, he already told me that. He's a senile old man. He just says crazy stuff.
Typical Jacksonian fashion.
Yeah, very dismissive, yeah. I don't know, just kind of an interesting little thing. I guess that's part of the 4 hours that they cut out was this little part with Andrew Jackson.
Well, I wonder who they got to play Jackson. I mean, they filmed it, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder, I don't know who the actor is. I'll have to to do some research on that. I wonder, who would I cast as that? Maybe Christopher Lloyd. Maybe he'd be a good Jackson.
I don't know. It's on the DVD though. Like if we went and we're watching it on Disney Plus. If we went and got the DVD and you watched it, you might be able to figure out who it is. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, some they just had Andrew Jackson come out and basically write off Charles Caroll as having dementia. So
I'm trying to think how old was Charles Caroll?
I think he died in his 90s, which is fairly impressive for.
He was 95 when he died.
Good.
I don't know. I was thinking about. I was looking into some genealogy, and there were the ancestors of my wife who they lived to be 101. He actually fought in the Revolution. He was this guy who was 101, and he became a Confederate. So I don't know. I guess he fought for the Revolution, then he fought against it. So it's one of those things that like with Charles Caroll, he is apparently so, I guess, little cared for that there was a World War II ship made out of him. It was made in October 1941, so before Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually, I think it saw action in World War II, but it was just a cargo ship, the SS Charles Caroll.
Yeah.
But apparently it was sold for scrap metal in 1970. The SS Carroll has no secrets aboard it.
Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, you can go look, but...
I don't know. There's no pipes aboard the SS Carroll.
Oh, and if it was sold for scrap, there's probably no ship to be found in the first place. So
yeah, nowhere.
So another part of this minute is the grandpa's delivery of this whole legend. One thing I noticed is that right before he says the word treasure, he kind of stops and like looks around a little bit.
Yeah, I noticed that. That was nice.
Yeah. As if like, he's just making sure nobody else is around before, or maybe he's like just kind of feigning it. He's feigning that sense of secret. I mean, they're in the attic, right?
Yeah. No, it makes the whole thing sort of electric. I thought what he was doing was almost like he was thinking in his mind, like, should I tell the story? Because he's thinking like it's so compelling. You obsess over it once you hear this story. So should I tell it to Ben Gates? Is like the point of no return. He's going to look to the side and he says, "All right, here we go."
And he's going to obsess over it. So he was right to do that.
Yeah.
It's a good beginning of the legend, and kind of, he doesn't start with the beginning. He doesn't start with the ancient Romans. He starts with, here's our family connection to the treasure, which is through Thomas Gates. It gives it a little bit more credibility, So this shot, this minute ends with Christopher Plummer's eye above one of the pyramids in Egypt, this pyramid in particular being unfinished. So it's just supposed to look like the back of the dollar bill.
Yeah, and I would say I think that's probably one of the best transitions in like the whole film.
Yeah,
like that transition between him and then going into ancient Egypt, because that just stuck with me. I think it's one of those shots that a lot of people know from the movie. Like one of the other sort of well-known shots is probably Ben Gates holding the Declaration of Independence while he's getting shot.
Yeah,
and then there's also this one with Christopher Plummer's eye above the pyramid.
Yeah.
It's just that sort of compelling.
Yeah, it's a good visual idea. I used to think that this Egyptian part was like taken from another movie, but the fact that there's an unfinished pyramid and they, kind of use that to set up this visual idea of the unfinished pyramid, this like visual parallel with the back of the dollar bill, that makes me think that they actually did film that or, render that special effect just for this particular movie.
Yeah, I don't actually know. I mean, I think maybe the shots of the Romans and stuff, that might have been B-roll footage from
that's what I thought
film, but I don't know. It seems to me like they could have plausibly filmed.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll get more into that in the next minute, because the next minute is full of the ancient world and all those Ben-Hur type shots of the ancient Romans and the ancient Egyptians and whatever else. So we'll get into more of that in the next minute. So hopefully we'll see you next time. You can catch us on nationaltreasureminute.blogspot.com. Thanks.